Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everyone 1 minute to get on and then we'll get started. All right. Thank you so much everyone for joining us and Happy New Year. I'm Shannon Von Felden and I'm the RDLA Program Director. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have quite the panel today who's going to talk a lot about their policy priorities for this year. So I think that will be a great way to start off the year for our group. As always, if you prefer to call into the webinar, I know internet can be tricky sometimes. There is the number there if you want to write it down just in case. And then of course, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, feel free to use the Q&A box and either I will answer them or I'll direct your questions to a speaker when they're done speaking. And as always, a reminder for the media, if you are joining us today, we ask that you refrain from quoting any of our speakers during the meeting and encourage you to follow up with them after the meeting today. And we are really excited that we have closed captioning for our webinars going forward. So if you'd like to take advantage of the closed captioning, all you have to do is click the live transcript button on the bottom of your window and it'll begin to show the closed captioning. Also, we have a translation service. So I posted a link in the chat. So if you need any translations into other languages, including Spanish, please go ahead and use that. And as I mentioned, we have a very full agenda. We're joined by Jamie Sullivan with the EveryLife Foundation, who's going to talk about the EveryLife Foundation's policy priorities for this year. We're also joined by David Davenport with the Personalized Medicine Coalition to talk about their policy priorities for this year as well. And then Jennifer Dexter with the National Health Council, a familiar face to all of you. Jordan McSherry with the Assistance Fund is going to talk about Cures 2.0 priorities. And then Dylan Simon with the EveryLife Foundation will talk about the newborn screening and diagnostics legislative priorities of the EveryLife Foundation. Kylie Barber with the National PKU Alliance is joining us to talk about the Medical Nutrition Equity Act. And Lindsey Cundiff with the EveryLife Foundation is here to talk about the really exciting new program, the YARR Academy. And then I will just do a quick finish up with some updates about RARE across America. So at this point, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you, Jamie.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Caitlin, you can go to the next slide. So thanks everyone for being here. So before I dive into the specifics of our policy priorities, I just want to take a minute to mention how the priorities are developed. And that is through our Community Congress program, which is a membership program where patient organizations come together with other rare disease stakeholders to provide strategic advice, develop policy priorities, and champion the various policy solutions developed through the group. And that is across a range of issues from newborn screening and diagnostics to regulatory policy and access issues. So the policy priorities I'm speaking about today are not necessarily all inclusive of our Community Congress work. I've selected a few, but the other thing to know is they're not inclusive of our ongoing COVID work, which could take an entire webinar by itself. So those are issues like ensuring the flexibilities and innovation introduced during the pandemic remain throughout and beyond the pandemic and in the public health emergency period, and then addressing major vaccine issues, including the inclusion of unpaid family caregivers and high-risk rare disease patients in high priority tiers for vaccines, and ensuring that there's clear communication and information being provided to answer rare disease patients' questions, as well as safe and accessible vaccine administration opportunities. So with that said, I want to explore the non-COVID related policies on this presentation. So next slide. So one of the first actions we've taken this year was to write to the then transition team for the Biden administration to communicate some of the top priorities that have been informed by the Community Congress activities. And with the new administration, also brings new leadership to federal agencies, and some of which is still unclear or temporary. And so in this regard, we also sent a letter with 81 patient organization members to indicate our support for the administration's appointment of Dr. Janet Woodcock to acting commissioner for the FDA. While it's still unclear who will lead the agency on a permanent basis, as well as other important agencies like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the administration has put an early emphasis on the role of science and research, and that's encouraging. So in our letter to President Biden, then President-elect Biden, we largely focused on the importance of accelerating rare disease therapy and development and infrastructure, access and coverage issues, especially the important role of newborn screening and coverage for genetic testing. And we also highlighted the need to ensure access to innovative therapies to the full indicated population. And then focus on our COVID-19 issues. So moving on to the next slide. Just a look, this is a lot to see, there's a lot on this slide. I wanted to give you a sense of our overall priorities. And this is our ongoing effort with Community Congress members to identify a range of relevant legislative and regulatory policies to the rare disease community. And this is, what might be on the table this year, and to look at how EveryLife will be involved. So a few caveats as you look at this busy slide. First, it's not final, and this is an ongoing effort with our Community Congress throughout this month and next as they meet in the different working groups to assess what should be on this document. The second is it will perhaps never be final in the sense it is fluid. And there are many reasons why one issue might move from one category to another. And I'm going to focus on 3 of these areas in further detail, and my colleague Dylan will focus more on our newborn screening and diagnostics policy later in the webinar. So just to give you a sense of what these different categories mean, clearly, our lead category is EveryLife's top priorities, and that's really the STAT Act, which I'll talk about in just a moment, and our newborn screening related legislation. These are the areas where we're going to lead and focus on to the greatest extent. But that doesn't mean that any of the other issues in the categories are less important. It's just about what our role is going to be or needs to be. And the engage are larger efforts where our role is to bring the rare disease voice to the conversation and rare disease priorities to the conversation. Whereas in support, there are really important efforts, but they're being led by other organizations. There's great coalitions around them, and our role is really to support those efforts in one way or another. And then monitor is just that we're not quite sure yet what we need to do in these areas, and we are monitoring them to identify new actions that need to be taken as things develop. Next slide. All right, so first, our lead priority this year is to advance the STAT Act, which is the Speeding Therapy Access Today Act of 2021 now. And if you're participating in Rare Across America, you will hear plenty more about the STAT Act in the coming weeks. And as soon as the bill is introduced, we look forward to returning to speak with all of you more about the bill. So I'm just going to give you a short summary today. And ultimately, you may have heard about it already. The core focus of the bill is to create a rare disease center of excellence, which is to improve rare disease coordination, stakeholder engagement, and policy development within FDA through the creation of this center of excellence. It's not a new concept. It's an authority that was given to the FDA already, and they have used to create the Oncology Center of Excellence. And to some degree are creating a similar concept for digital health as well. So beyond the Center of Excellence, the bill also establishes a Rare Disease and Conditions Advisory Committee to inform rare disease policies within the center and throughout the FDA, to think about development of innovative approaches to drug approval, and really to make sure that there's a central body discussing of experts, external experts, including a robust participation from the patient and caregiver community, and various other rare disease experts that can come together and provide the agency with the best advice and really help represent the needs of the rare disease community. It also provides funding, establishes a grant program to focus on the development of best practices and research that will support the development of therapies for very small populations in particular. And then there's provisions that intended to strengthen patient access to FDA-approved therapies, both public and commercial plans. And we do that, we suggest that they do that by encouraging the cooperation, the early coordination, sharing of information between FDA and payers. And so all with the intention that coverage is, access is provided early after approval and to the full intended indicated population, as is seen on the label, of course. So these are the 4 key areas of STAT. We are currently working on finalizing the legislative text and anticipate that we'll have that very soon and we'll be able to get that introduced. We're working very closely with the co-chairs of the Rare Disease Caucus, all 4 offices, and we are hopeful that we can indeed, get this bill introduced in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion, and in time to allow all those participating in rare across America to really raise your voices and awareness of the need for the STAT Act. Okay, next slide. So next is Padufa, and I know that a previous RDLA webinar focused on more on Padufa, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the what, but I wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the issues that we're amplifying as we engage in the Padufa reauthorization process, which includes monthly stakeholder meetings for patient advocates, patient advocacy organizations that signed up back in August. So the EveryLife Foundation focus areas center around transparency, authenticity, consistency, and comprehensiveness. And those also have been supplemented and informed by our Community Congress group. This is just really a snapshot of the issues. There could be 3 full slides of Padufa issues, and you can find our Padufa comments from the original stakeholder meeting on the EveryLife website. So this is just a tiny snapshot in the time we have today, but it includes a real focus on transparency, making sure that resources that have been collected through the PFDD workshops, the externally led meetings, the voice of the patient reports, that those resources are made available to the agency to support the PFDD innovation and to the community to be able to mine and understand what has been learned and what can be applied to other communities and other future innovation. We want to, again, going back to the themes you saw in the STAT Act, to reduce the barriers between regulatory approval and market access, and enhance resources. So Padufa is one way that FDA resources are set. We want to focus on making sure CBER, which is the group that will be focusing on rare disease cell and gene therapies, or that does focus, make sure they have the resources they need to support the review and focus on engagement and innovation that we've seen in CEDAR. Enhancing resources to support consistent and expanded PFDD initiatives. We've made great progress since the last Padufa, Padufa 6, which is underway now, but we need to continue to build on that progress, and improving the guidance for when and how patient advocacy, sorry for the typo, groups can interact with sponsors and the agency during the development process. Again, just a snapshot of what we are focused on, but some of the key issues. Next slide. And finally, there's 21st century cures. And 2.0. And I believe you also have explored this on previous RDLA webinars, but you see here, this is really building on our focus in the STAT Act, in Padufa, and identifying innovations and policy issues that are important to the rare disease community so that we can bring those forward, ensuring your voices are represented in the overall effort. So it's not yet clear how exactly this effort will advance this Congress, or this year, but the slide gives you an idea of some of the additional regulatory and access innovations that we feel should be a priority for inclusion in any package that does advance. Again, you see the same themes: establishing a rare disease center of excellence within FDA, ensuring clinical trial inclusion criteria are not impeding access after approval, making sure that we are able to continue the current practice using tailored approaches, to evaluate applications for rare disease therapy, thinking about innovative clinical trial designs, and plenty more. And I know I'm just about out of time here, so I think I will stop there, Caitlin and Shannon, and turn it back to you, and happy to answer any questions. But I will say that this is a lightning round, but I just wanted to end with, one of my former bosses and mentors, John Walsh's favorite quotes, as it really speaks to why you're all here today, and how appreciative I am for all of the work that you do as advocates to speak for your communities and to raise the awareness of general rare disease issues overall. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jamie. There was a question in the chat about funding for the STAT Act.
Yes, so that is something we're actually actively working on now, and that will manifest in our appropriations ask. So just ongoing conversations as recent as this morning to identify what resources we should be advocating for the FDA this year. And then the STAT Act authorizes the Center of Excellence. And when that advances, there will need to be appropriations to support that ask and that authorization. So we're working out the details of the sequencing and what exactly the numbers will look like, but that's a great question.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm sure that people have other questions. They can either email myself and I can direct them to Jamie, or you can email Jamie directly.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jamie. David, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to you.
Great, thank you, Shannon. So my name is David Davenport, and I'm the Manager of Public Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. I'd like to thank EveryLife for inviting us to share our priorities and connect with you all today. In case you're not familiar with our organization, we have more than 200 members that span the healthcare spectrum. They include pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies, healthcare systems, and patient advocacy organizations that represent cancers, health disparities, as well as rare diseases, including EveryLife. At the end of the day, we all come together to advocate for personalized medicine so that it can benefit patients just like you. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Next slide. And so we define personalized medicine as an approach to healthcare that accounts for a patient's biology, often using their genetic or genomic information in addition to their values and circumstances to develop targeted treatment and prevention plans. And so soon we will be releasing a report on 2020 FDA approvals, highlighting that personalized medicines have accounted for more than 24% of newly approved drugs for each of the last 6 years. And over the past decade, as we've been doing these analyses, we've seen a growing trend of approvals outside of oncology, especially in areas like rare disease. Each year, PMC as a coalition engages all of its members, much like EveryLife, in defining our policy priorities for the coming year. And these fall into 4 general buckets: modernizing regulatory policies through FDA, coverage and payment policies, advancing innovation and care delivery and the value of personalized medicine, and finally cultivating support for personalized medicine. And there are so many topics that we could cover today, but I will focus on a few of our top legislative priorities for the coming year that may be of particular interest to you all. Next slide, please. The First thing I'd like to talk about is the Congressional Personalized Medicine Caucus. So with the increase of personalized medicines coming to market that I talked about, especially in areas like cell and gene therapy applications, it's really challenging the way that new treatments and technologies are regulated, covered and reimbursed, as well as integrated into health systems. So with the support of our members, a couple years ago, PMC set out to educate members of Congress about personalized medicine and discuss how a congressional caucus focused on advancing this approach to healthcare could benefit both patients and the health system. And so as a result of this multi-year effort, early last year, a bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers launched the Congressional Personalized Medicine Caucus. It's co-chaired by Senators Kirsten Sinema and Tim Scott, as well as Representatives Eric Swalwell and Tom Emmer. The caucus is not focused on any disease in particular, but we do believe the caucus will complement the work of many of the other disease caucuses, including the Rare Disease Caucus. Last year, we organized 2 educational briefings, one focused on early detection technologies that featured the father whose son had been diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy, where he shared his diagnosis journey. Our second briefing also discussed the role of personalized medicine addressing COVID-19. This year, we're focused on continuing to grow membership in the caucus. And we are also planning on holding 2 additional educational briefings, and we're looking at opportunities to move just beyond educational efforts, especially on the Senate side. You can find more information, including a list of the current members, on our website, and I've included a link on the slide. And we really do invite you to share information about the caucus with your members of Congress or offices your organization has relationships with. If you're interested in any supporting materials, I'm happy to coordinate with you. Feel free to send me an email at ddavenport@personalizedmedicinecoalition.org. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to talk about our priorities as they relate to user fees and Cures 2.0. And so since these legislative initiatives are really broad in scope, they offer multiple opportunities to advance personalized medicine by providing agencies with additional resources to modernize. So there's a lot of overlap in what PMC is advocating among those among the Padufa and Medufa, as well as Cures 2.0. One of our first key priorities is making sure that FDA is meeting its staffing needs, especially in the areas of cell and gene therapies, much like with what we went over earlier. Second is related to real-world evidence and data. Real-world evidence is clinical evidence that's collected outside of traditional clinical trials about the use, benefits, and risks of a medical product. And we want to make sure that FDA has the resources it needs to continue to advance in this direction. We're particularly interested in how the user fee discussions can address issues around the repeated use of real-world databases for regulatory submission to support research development and regulatory approvals. We also want to encourage FDA to disseminate learnings from real-world data submissions so that researchers can more efficiently leverage these real-world data sets. Next, digital health technologies or devices and the related software that collect health information really hold the potential for enhancing clinical trial efficiency, collecting real-world evidence, and providing personalized insights at the point of care. But a better understanding is needed on how to measure and monitor their software quality. FDA recently created a Digital Health Center of Excellence to advance innovation in this area, and we want to make sure that the agency has the resources it needs to continue coordination within centers at FDA as well as across government agencies. Decentralized trials are trials conducted remotely through telemedicine and local healthcare providers. We've been talking about them a lot in the healthcare community during COVID-19. And really, thanks to innovations in digital health technologies, decentralized trials promise to provide more patients with access to investigational therapies and increase patient participation in research. We also think these would make it easier for diverse populations and patients in difficult geographic regions to access trials. We realize it's important to extend these types of trials to higher risk populations, including rare disease patients, which are usually small and dispersed as communities. And so we really do look to you all on how PMC could go about supporting this. Finally, Coverage modernization was a key component of the latest concept paper for Cures 2.0 that was shared last year. It raised questions about how to modernize coverage policies for cell and gene therapies, medical products for small patient populations, and genomic sequencing. And we do plan to engage any such proposals that emerge in the next iteration of the bill. If I could go to the next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to discuss two bills that were introduced in the last Congress that many of you are probably already familiar with: Representative Swalwell's Advancing Access to Precision Medicine Act, as well as Representative Peters' Ending the Diagnostic Odyssey Act. Swalwell's bill would provide for a National Academy of Medicine study on how to reduce barriers to the utilization of genetic and genomic testing. It would also create an option for states to provide DNA sequencing services to children with a suspected undiagnosed rare disease. PMC has supported several versions of this bill over the past few years, along with EveryLife. And there was also a similar bill called the Ending the Diagnostic Odyssey Act, introduced by Peters, that includes a leaner coverage proposal and does not include the National Academy study. Ultimately, we really do want to see these two bills come together because we believe that expanding access to sequencing services and the National Academy's report would significantly benefit the rare disease community. So the new Congress presents opportunities to reintroduce this legislation, and we really plan to stay engaged on this issue, both with folks on the Hill and with EveryLife. And I'll take any questions if there are any. I want to thank you for sharing my email.
I'm checking the chat, and I don't see any. So you must have just been very thorough, David.
Great. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. All right. Next, we have Jennifer with the National Health Council.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to be a part of this and the invitation from EveryLife, who is a member of National Health Council and way more than that, a very vital partner for us. I appreciate being here today. So next slide. For those of you that aren't familiar with the National Health Council, we are almost 101-year-old organization now, whose whole goal is to bring together the diverse voices of patients to keep them centered in the healthcare debate. We provide a voice for over 160 million people with disabilities and chronic conditions. Our membership is primarily made up of patient advocacy organizations, and you can see on this slide a sampling of some of the groups that we work with very closely. Next slide. Okay, so much like the folks you've heard from already, we go through a process every year of refining and focusing our policy work. Because we are a coalition joining together of lots of different patient organizations, our priorities tend to be a little 30,000-foot level. And then we implement that in supporting our members and bringing our members together to support specific bills, specific initiatives. So every year we generate a lot of input from our membership, from our board, from outside, and also assessing, what's most likely to be front and center on the Hill this year. And we develop a matrix very similar to what you saw from EveryLife that has 4 quadrants. And the axes are what's most important to patients and what can we as NHC most influence. And it divides into 4 quadrants: lead, partner, engage as needed, and monitor. And I thought I'd just walk you through some of the higher level. These are particularly the lead issues. These are the things that we're going to spend the most of our time, not necessarily that they are the most critical, but also that we have the ability within our bandwidth to address them. So for 2021, and I should also mention that these are not finalized yet. We are also in the middle of finalizing that process and in a CEO transition. So we are getting ready to finalize them soon, but these are likely to stay pretty close to what they are. The first one is medical innovation, and that's primarily working with FDA on how they develop and disseminate and get out new treatments, new drugs. And this year, as you've heard the previous speakers talk about, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or Padufa, is going to be the main vehicle for that. When the industry and FDA are negotiating what are going to be the requirements on industry, on FDA, around their agreement for the next several years. And we are providing as much input as possible there. And our priorities really are making sure that patients and their caregivers are engaged in medical innovation from the very beginning to the very end, everywhere from study design to trials to dissemination. Looking at real world evidence and core impact sets. And that's really making sure that the things that FDA are looking at are things that matter to patients, are the things that are really happening in their lives, and are consistent so that they're able to be compared, one drug versus another. The next big area is patient access, and that's really about making sure that we are CMS, other agencies that are working together, working to provide healthcare, are engaging patients, like I said, with FDA early and often, and making sure that anything that is an access to getting care for a patient. For instance, we just provided comment on making sure that prior authorization, what insurance companies use to try and make sure that people are getting the right thing, doesn't become a barrier for a patient, things like that. The next area is high value care. Again, oftentimes the debate around healthcare, and particularly federally funded healthcare, tends to be on how much does it cost. And we want to balance that both with cost and with the experience of the patient. What makes sense for an individual and their provider to work together and decide on a treatment plan for them? What are those things that it makes sense to invest in a slightly higher cost treatment or lower cost treatment based on that individual's needs? Next area is healthcare costs. And the last couple of years, this has primarily been around particularly the cost of drugs for people in the Medicare program, making sure that we're working on legislation that would limit how much a patient would have to pay out of pocket for Medicare Part D for prescription drugs. That is something that's a high priority for us. Every other form of insurance has some sort of cap or annual spending that goes into it. And just generally making sure that costs are transparent, making sure that you know both what to expect as a patient around what a given treatment or a given experience might cost, and what the hospital and the insurance company are working together on, those kinds of things. The final one is one that we had a whole separate matrix on this year because it broke after we did our priorities for 2020, which is COVID-19 response, obviously. And we've kind of divided that into two tracks. The first is making sure that people have access to testing, vaccines, treatment as they become available, as they are most appropriate for those individuals, and that they are affordable and that they are accessible and that they are distributed equitably. The other side of it is that so many of our organizations have been, our member organizations and the patient advocacy groups have been so affected by the loss of fundraising, special events, just general economic rollbacks, that we need to make sure that, like many small businesses and large businesses too, that they're, when Congress is looking at providing financial support, recovery legislation, that nonprofits are included in that, and that patient advocacy groups are getting their need. So those are our big need areas. I wanted to touch on a couple areas that fall in the partner category, but are very high priority for us as well. They aren't on the slide, but the first is access to telehealth. I think that's really critical, both we've had some real success in the last year in creating flexibilities that provide more people access to telehealth services. Some of those are time limited and connected to COVID. Some of those have been extended kind of permanently. So continuing to make sure that people have access to appropriate and the telehealth access that they want. And also that it's not used as a tool to kind of segregate people or get people not equal services. So keeping an eye on that. And then making sure that people have increasing and improving access to health insurance. And that's really about protecting and preserving those rights and access that the Affordable Care Act provides to people, and that we are creating policy that gets at those still uninsured folks. We have those in the partner care category only because there are other groups that are kind of leading on those, and we work very closely with them. So if we go to the next slide. Overarching all of this is some significant work in bringing together all of the patient advocacy community around equity. It is embedded in everything we are doing for a long time, but really has come front and center over the last year and a half or so. We are making sure that there is a patient role for, a role for the patient community in driving health equity. And we need to make sure that that voice is put front and center, and that it's not just about Congress, or it's not just about the provider groups or the researchers and all of that. So we have brought together the patient community to really commit to working together around 4 pillars of equity. And those are access to insurance, access to quality care, access to medical inclusion and medical innovation. And then the final one is working together with other organizations on social determinants of health. And those are those social things that affect your health, like access to transportation and nutrition and healthcare and housing and those kinds of things. So let's go to the final slide. And just to walk you through very quickly some of the specific things we are doing. We have brought together some of the leading thought leaders in the patient community, held a roundtable last year. We issued a call to action to all the patient advocacy groups. We turned that into a consensus statement that the CEOs of 58 of our national patient advocacy groups signed on to. And this year we are transitioning that into a task force that will be advising us as we work with other leaders. We're going to be working with congressional leaders, especially on this, the administration, those that are really making decisions about this, to infuse what is coming out of the patient community as recommendations into those discussions. We'll have a series of roundtables on each of those pillars. Each of those will come out with policy recommendations, and those will be disseminated to the Hill leaders to make sure that they know what's happening, particularly working with some of the caucuses or groups of members that represent what they call the Tri-Caucus, which is the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Congressional Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. So that will be a major policy focus and program focus for us for the next year. So I think that is it. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions if folks have them.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. We did have one question that I missed the answer to this. I think you gave a stat of 160 million, and someone was asking if that was worldwide or just in the United States.
US.
Great.
My understanding, at least.
Perfect. I think that was it. Questions?
I did see one in the chat about access to telehealth beyond the pandemic. And I will just say, yes, absolutely. That is a major focus for a lot of organizations, is making sure that we are assessing those telehealth flexibilities that came in during COVID and other things, and pushing to continue those that are working, for those that should be time limited, advocating for that, really assessing to make sure that everything's appropriate there.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here today. All right, next we have Jordan with the Assistance Fund.
Hi, everyone. As Shannon mentioned, I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at the Assistance Fund, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about our Cures 2.0 priorities. So you can go to the next slide. So just as a refresher, Cures 2.0 is a proposed piece of legislation that's building on the success of the 2016 21st Century Cures Bill. And Cures 2.0 aims to modernize the delivery of healthcare and how new and innovative treatments are accessed by patients. And the Assistance Fund, just to give you a little bit of background on the Assistance Fund. So we're an independent patient assistance organization that helps patients affected by rare, chronic, and life-threatening diseases access their FDA-approved medications. And so TAF actually manages 70 disease programs, many of which are rare. And we offer 3 different types of assistance: copay, premium, and medical incidental. And this right here is our vision and our mission. So you can see that this is kind of what guides both our policy priorities and our entire operations team down in Orlando. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So like I said, TAF is headquartered in Orlando, but in 2019, we opened a DC office focused exclusively on policy and advocacy. And the chief focus of my role at TAF is on access and identifying the policy priorities that affect patient access and pursuing policy fixes to improve patients' ability to access treatments, diagnostics, and the clinical care they need. And we do this, we identify these policy priorities by surveying our patient community, the individual patients that TAF serves through our patient assistance program, but then also working and partnering with different organizations out there, like EveryLife Foundation, to identify what these policy priorities are and how we can help support those. The other way that our policy priorities are driven is by our Advocacy Committee, which is a group of health policy and patient advocacy professionals that help us understand the policy landscape and how we can be most helpful and influential. You can go ahead to the next slide. So some of the policies that we hope to be included in Cures 2.0, which we hope to see moving sometime in the next couple of months of 2021. So these include Medicaid coverage for DNA sequencing technologies. This is something that David mentioned. This is a very important policy issue to TAF because we have so many rare disease patients, and we want to see them be able to access the diagnostics that they need. So specifically HR 4393, which is Representative Swallow's bill that was introduced in the last Congress, the Advancing Access to Precision Medicine Act, is the particular policy that we hope to see be incorporated into 21st century cures, because it encompasses all of the different DNA sequencing technologies that are out there and gives patients and physicians choices on which one is right for them. The other patient priority that we hope to see included in Cures 2.0 is collaboration between FDA and CMS. So, this is very similar to what Jennifer talked about and to what Jamie talked about. We hope that we can expedite access to new and innovative therapies and provide disease-specific education and guidance to states. We're really hoping that we can expedite these, but then also make sure that there's meaningful engagement between the agency and CMS, between FDA and CMS, to make sure that CMS understands, what types of treatments are coming down the pipeline, what types of challenges exist, in that development program, and the challenges that exist in studying this disease in particular, especially in rare, where we don't have a blueprint of how we cover this or how we measure outcomes. So we're really hoping that there can be meaningful collaboration and partnership between these two agencies. Also supporting access to transformative therapies. So more and more cell and gene therapies are going to be coming onto the market, and we need a way to support states and support manufacturers into entering into value-based payment arrangements, where really we can be defining value as how the patient, and the patient community interprets what value is to them, and then be able to collect real-world evidence post-approval for the purpose of reimbursement. So we want to help make sure that we hope that Cures 2.0 would help make sure that the patient voice is heard during the development of these value-based payment arrangements, and that this these value-based payment arrangements can actually happen, that there can be legislative fixes that make both the states, state Medicaid agencies, and also manufacturers comfortable entering into these arrangements. And then another, our fourth, policy issue that we hope to see, at least circulated and discussed around 21st Century Cures 2.0 would be an Office of Patient Affairs or a Patient Affairs staff at CMS. We really think that there needs to be a place for patients to go to better understand what CMS's role is, a place for patients to go to provide input on policies that affect their patient community, and an entry point similar to what we have at FDA to make sure that the agency is familiar with the priorities of patients, and we can advocate for patient-centered policies. Right now, there really, that doesn't exist, right? If you want to provide input to CMS on a particular policy that could impact your disease population, you need to submit, comments just like everyone else does, formal comments, reacting to a piece of, regulatory, a rule or proposed rule. So that's something that we would like to see. We would like to see happen in order to really shift how we think about reimbursement from, just having stakeholders be the insurance companies or the plans and CMS and the manufacturers, to really one that incorporates the patient perspective and voice. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So, if there are, TAFIS really wants to be a resource for patient groups, and we're really, as we're new in DC, we're really looking to the patient community and the patient groups that can, highlight their priorities and the issues that they're seeing in their patient communities, and bring them to us so that we can work together, and partner to figure out what the best path forward might be to helping them and to helping your communities. So if you want to learn more specifically about TAF and the patient assistance services that we provide, then please contact me. My email's right there. If you want to support some of our Cures 2.0 initiatives or share your community's policy priorities, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're very much looking to engage and interact with the different communities and the different groups on this call. So thank you all very much for the opportunity to share today. I really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Jordan. We did have one question that popped up during your presentation that might be for you and maybe a couple of others here that are on here, but there's a question about how private insurers and ACA plans don't cover DNA sequencing either, and whether there were any initiatives underway to mandate private insurance coverage.
I'm not as familiar with that. I've been working really on the legislation that covers Medicaid. But David, you may have some comments on that, and be able to provide some insight.
Hi, sorry, I had my camera covered. Yeah, I mean, we've been focused mainly on the legislative side as well, but I think that this kind of generally gets back to what we're trying to do with Cures 2.0 is to, in general, provide greater access to these sequencing services. So that's definitely, I think, something that we can consider as we look to other legislation and how it moves forward beyond just the bills that we talked about with the Advancing Access to Precision Medicine Act.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't heard of any particular legislation focused on private insurance coverage. This question was posted anonymously, but that person can always get in contact with myself as well, and we can provide more information, do some more digging on behalf. So let us know. Thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your time.
All righty. Next, we have Dylan talking about newborn screening and diagnostics.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm going to again talk about newborn screening and diagnostics, both at the federal and state level, and the work that the EveryLife Foundation is doing in this area. Next slide, please. So I want to start with the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act. As many of you on this call are aware, authorization for the program expired as of 2019. But before I get into a little bit of the current landscape, I want to kind of review the bill a little bit and kind of our current state of play. So next slide, please. And so I really want to start with kind of the key bill provisions that was found in the House version of the bill. Importantly, it did increase authorization levels for the funding, which is really helpful to both the HRSA and CDC programs to really ensure that the federal program can support the state programs to the best of their ability. In addition, within the reauthorization, there was reauthorization for the HRSA grants to expand and improve their screening programs to help educate parents and healthcare providers, as well as improve follow-up care. In addition, a really interesting part of the House version of the bill was to provide HRSA with the ability to award grants for pilot studies, which is a really key part of newborn screening and the newborn screening process in terms of collecting information. In addition, it was able to reauthorize the advisory committee, as well as direct the committee to make the RUSP nomination process more transparent, which is really important because the RUSP is such a key part of newborn screening. And unfortunately, the nomination process can be a bit daunting. It is a many-year process, and there's not always the most transparent in terms of what you actually need. And so this was a kind of a great part of the bill to really kind of work on that opaqueness and really make it more understandable for patient advocacy organizations. In addition, it directed the National Academy of Medicine to conduct a study on how to modernize the newborn screening program. And so the newborn screening program at the federal levels is still relatively new. The original Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act was passed in 2008. And so this study really provides an opportunity to evaluate the current state of the newborn screening program and how can it improve as we move forward, as we anticipate more and more conditions to pursue newborn screening as a diagnostic option. And so we're really excited about this. And we're excited that the bill is going to come back, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But next slide, please. And so current status. So the advisory committee, while it did require reauthorization, the bill was able to receive discretionary advisory committee status from Secretary Azar about a year ago at this point. And so the committee is authorized for 2 years, which is standard for discretionary committees. And this is really important because for the first half of 2020, the advisory committee wasn't meeting. And when the advisory committee isn't meeting, they're unable to do the work they do, primarily which is reviewing RUSP nomination packages. And so there's currently a condition package for MPS 2 that is nominated for the RUSP, and that was delayed because of the inability for the advisory committee to meet. But thankfully, the committee did meet. They had 2 meetings in 2020, and they're actually having their next meeting February 11th and 12th of this year, which we're really excited about, and registration can be found online. In addition, there was program funding for the CDC and HRSA programs, which is really important to know that while the program remain unauthorized or their authorization lapsed, Congress was still able to appropriate funds to ensure that these programs will still function and still working. Next slide. And it's also really important to know that we have a new Senate. And so there had been a proposed amendment in the Senate that had really stalled out the progress of the reauthorization in last year's Congress. But that has now changed with the new order of the Senate. That is still kind of being sorted out. The Senate at the moment is in a bit of flux as they really determine the Health Committee and the power sharing agreement. And the best thing I can say about the Senate is we know there's a new Senate. We know that the Democrats will be in the majority, but there's also a lot that we don't know. And so that's a little bit still up in the air, but we're happy to see that the new Senate, we believe, will make it a little bit easier to pass the reauthorization. I would like to stress the fact that it's a little bit easier. It is not just because we have this new Senate does not mean that this is going to be a walk in the park. It is still going to be a lot of work. We'll still require a fair amount of advocacy from the community, which we're really excited about, and we definitely have high hopes, but it's still going to be require a good amount of effort to get it done. Next slide, please. So here was the great news that came out earlier this week. The Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act was introduced into the House on the night of the 25th. And while the four main original sponsors, Congresswoman Roba Aller, Congresswoman Mike Simpson, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, as well as Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler, they were the original four co-sponsors last time around. They have actually been joined by 20 additional original co-sponsors this year. There are 24 original co-sponsors on this bill, a bipartisan group of congressmen, which is fantastic to see. There's such broad support for the language for the bill, and so that is great news. It's a great place to start. It's great to see that our champions in the House are moving forward and really getting the ball rolling and getting the conversation started around the reauthorization. It's also important that we continue to build that co-sponsors list. And so there will be an action alert coming from the foundation in the coming days for you to contact your congressman, contact your representative about them joining as a co-sponsor for the reauthorization. And so as we can continue to build co-sponsors for the legislation, it will continue to highlight just how big of an impact this legislation would have on the rare disease community. And so next slide, please. One more, there we go. And so I want to talk briefly about HR 4393 because it's been discussed by David as well as Jordan prior to me. But the EveryLife Foundation also does support HR 4393, the Advancing Access to Precision Medicine Act, because we support the broad coverage, the DNA sequencing for diagnostic purposes, the ability to use genetic testing to try to limit that diagnostic odyssey is such a key part of trying to improve the improvements for the rare disease community. And so we are really excited to see that there's building support around the community for this legislation and for the need to really increase the use of DNA sequencing as a diagnostic tool. Also a really interesting part of the original bill was that it directed the National Academy of Medicine to study how genetic testing may improve preventative care. And it included a specific subset to include studying how genetic testing may improve health outcomes for individuals with rare diseases, which we were really excited to see. And so we're excited to work with David and Jordan moving forward on this bill as we hope to get it passed in this year's session. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our state newborn screening work. And so for newborn screening, the nomination implementation pathway is a long and rigorous one. And so it starts at the evidence development stage, in which you are developing a screening method. You are developing a therapeutic to treat the condition. You have to develop an infrastructure for follow-up services to ensure that once you have identified an individual through newborn screening, they can actually conduct the confirmation testing and confirm the proper diagnosis. And that process can take many, many years, anywhere from 5 to 10 years. And it is a rigorous process, and this entire process is led by the patient advocacy organizations. And once they have the package developed, they will submit for a RUS nomination. And once it's there, the nomination package will get reviewed by the Evidence Review Committee and then reviewed by the full advisory committee. It's also important to note here that if the package is not accepted, you can continue to build evidence. So there have been multiple situations in which a condition submitted for RUS nomination, it was not accepted. They then continued to build the evidence for their package and then resubmitted and it was added to the RUS. And the reason I go through this is because it highlights how much work it requires to get on the RUS. It is a many-year process, and it is often led by patient advocacy organizations who are pushing the research, who are pushing the development of the package, who are working to build that together. And the reason I talk about this is because that is just the first part. Following that, you then have to go by state implementation begins, and you have to go to each individual 50 states to ensure that they can add that condition to their newborn screening state panel. And so us at the EveryLife Foundation believe that they do enough work just to get it on the RUS that we can try to help with that state newborn screening policy. So next slide, please. And so that's where the RUS alignment legislation comes in. Programs vary widely by state, and you have conditions screening for fewer than 30 conditions, or others screening for more than 60 conditions. And that variety can lead to a wide variety of health outcomes. And we believe that the RUS should really be the minimum, not the goal that states are aiming for on the newborn screening panel. And so we work to go into states to pass what we call a RUS alignment legislation. Next slide, please. And so this coming year, we're going into 3 states, Georgia, North Carolina, and Ohio. Next slide, please. And so here's a little bit about the legislation itself. And so what it does, it requires the state to screen for any disorder that is recommended by the federal RUSP. A key part of the statement is that it is a minimum, it is not a maximum. States can still add conditions that are not on the RUSP for the state newborn screening panel if they see fit, but we believe that the RUSP should be the minimum, not the goal. And so it requires the state to screen for any disorder on the RUSP. In addition, it implements a timeline for when the state needs to begin screening for the new RUSP disorders. So currently on average, it can take anywhere from 5 to 6 years for a state to add a condition to their state panel following its addition to the RUSP. And we believe that that is just too long. While we recognize the need for states to build up the infrastructure needed to begin screening for a condition, we think that 5 to 6 years is too long. And in states that we have passed legislation before, in both California and Florida, the timeline has typically been about 2 to 2.5 years. In addition, the legislation works to ensure that the funding source is available moving forward to facilitate addition for the new screens and conditions. We want to ensure the fact that when a condition is added, these state programs have the funding necessary to add the condition. And so that's a really kind of important part, because we recognize that it costs money to add a condition, and we want to ensure the fact that the state programs have that funding necessary to ensure that they can do that. And so we're really excited about this year to go into Georgia, North Carolina, and Ohio. And so we're going to be calling advocates in the coming months to really advocate for their state representatives, to their state senators on the importance of this legislation in these 3 states. So thank you again for your time. Next slide, please. Yes, so for more information, please go to rarescreening.org. If you have any questions, my email address is on the slide, and I will check to see if there are any questions.
Dylan, I think that there was one about whether there were efforts to expand the Advancing Access to Precision Medicine Act to individuals over 21.
At the moment, I have not heard that. I would ask Jordan and David if they have heard anything about that either. At the moment, I have seen it just little into the age of 21.
I have not seen anything about that, but I think it's an important question to bring up with the offices in our next meetings.
I would agree with that point.
Yeah, I'd agree with Jordan. Haven't heard anything, but it's great to hear the feedback from you all today.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that was it, Dylan, questions wise. So thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here. All right, next we have Kylie.
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. It's good to be back with you guys. As Shannon said, my name is Kylie Barber, and I'm the Medical Foods Policy Associate with the National PKU Alliance in partnership with the EveryLife Foundation. And today I'm going to give a brief update on the Medical Nutrition Equity Act. And as a quick reminder, the Medical Nutrition Equity Act is a bill to provide for the coverage of medically necessary food and vitamins and individual amino acids for digestive and inherited metabolic disorders under federal health programs and private health insurance. All right, next slide. All right, so talking about the Medical Nutrition Equity Act in this last 116th session of Congress, we ended on a really strong footprint. We ended with 77 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. 66 of those were Democrats and 11 were Republicans. And of these co-sponsors, 68 will be returning to Congress or have returned to Congress in 2021. And on the Senate side, we ended with 8 co-sponsors, 6 Democrats and 2 Republicans, all of whom have returned as well to this new congressional session. So we are actually really thrilled with these numbers. We nearly tripled the amount of co-sponsors from last Congress in the House, and we gained good footing in the Senate, teeing us up for a strong start for this session of Congress. Next slide. Okay, so all of the lead sponsors of the bill have confirmed that they will once again be the leads on the new bill for this new Congress, which includes on the House of Representatives, Representative Jim McGovern from Massachusetts and Jamie Herrera Butler from Washington. And on the Senate side, we have Senator Casey from Philadelphia, as well as Senator Ernst from Iowa. So they, again, have confirmed that they will be the champions for this bill once it's reintroduced. And the current status of the bill is that we plan to reintroduce it as soon as possible. As soon as they are reintroduced, we'll reach out and ask advocates to contact their senators and the representatives to request their support. Our goal is to build support for the bill as quickly as possible. So we are asking advocates to stand by and stay alert, ready to reach out to your members of Congress and senators once the bill drops. We do not have a specific timeline right now at the moment. This issue remains a top priority for Congressman McGovern, and negotiations on the bill language are currently being worked on. We are anticipating a strong start this Congress with as many original co-sponsor signatories right out the door, especially for the House bill. Next slide, please. Okay, so upcoming advocacy opportunities for the Medical Nutrition Equity Act. Tonight, we actually have a webinar. The National PKU Alliance is hosting a webinar, including speakers from speakers will provide a high-level overview of the new administration and Congress through a health policy lens. You'll also hear more about the Medical Nutrition Equity Act and newborn screening policies. You can register tonight to join us at mpkua.org under the News and Events tab. Another very exciting opportunity to advocate for the Medical Nutrition Equity Act is coming up February 22nd through March 5th through the Rare Disease Legislative Advocates Rare Across America. And this is obviously a great opportunity to prime your representatives and senators for the reintroduction of the Medical Nutrition Equity Act. And the best part is advocates can do it right from home. Also, if you haven't done so, we ask that advocates submit your medical food stories at nutritionequity.org. These stories are critical to building support for the bill in Congress. So we please ask others you know who are facing these issues to submit the stories as well. And that is all I have for you guys today.
Thanks, Kylie. I appreciate you being here today. We did have one quick question about whether there was other legislation regarding medical foods out there.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I believe Representative Andy Biggs from Arizona has introduced a bill. The priorities and issues are a little bit different from the Medical Nutrition Equity Act bill, but if you want to shoot me an email, we can kind of go over, tease out the nuances between the two.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Lindsey, take it away. You good, Lindsey?
Yeah, I lost my notes, but that's all right. We're winging it. Okay, next slide, please. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, RDLA, for letting me pop on here really quick. I just wanted to tell everyone in the community about this awesome opportunity coming up for young adults. This is our latest and greatest addition to the YARR programming, which is our youth extension of RDLA. And that is the Yar Leadership Academy. This is a curriculum devised to identify leadership roles that are impactful in the rare disease community on policymaking, drug development, and the regulatory process. As we all know, representation matters. So this curriculum is devised to identify those roles and teach you the steps on how to get towards those roles. This is application based. We are trying to limit the the courses to 15 people max. So applications are currently open and they close February 15th. So please get them in right away. Head over to heresyar.org to apply today. Next slide, please. Wanted to just share really briefly a little bit more of a rundown about the curriculum that will be offered. Classes will start in March and end in May. Each class will be 3 hours long. Woo! I know it's long, don't worry, we'll have breaks. And it's going to be hopefully packed with some interaction and lots of room for dialogue. This will be a safe space for you to have conversations with experts in these fields. So that's also why we're trying to limit the capacity so that there's space to do that. This last capstone presentation is again really just steering you in the pathway to create, get you all set for that next step. So this presentation is actually your resume, presenting to the rest of the class why you would apply for this certain position, this certain leadership role. So again, it's really just hoping to prepare you for right when you're done with this curriculum, heading you out into the field and getting you going. Next slide, and I'll see what I forgot. So we are absolutely invested in you. Other reasons to attend this academy. We are providing $1,000 travel stipends to those who graduate the Yar Leadership Academy. Still hoping for an in-person event for Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill, which, as most of you know, has been extended to July this year. So those who graduate will have an $1,000 stipend to help get you there. Career development skills, we're providing a certificate of completion, and of course, networking opportunities with experts in the field and other young adults in rare disease, and creating that clear pathway to the next steps in advocacy. I think I forgot to mention, to be eligible, you will be, it's for rare disease advocates ages 18 to 29. That's an important part. And again, application closes February 15th. So if you are interested, or you know someone else in the community who might be interested, head over to hearusyar.org, or I'm your resource. I'm always available for questions. I'll try to post my direct email in the chat. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsey. You had a few questions in there, but I think I handled them in the Q&A, so we're good.
As usual, thank you for handling, Shannon. Always on top of it. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you for being here. All right, you guys have been superstars hanging in there. I know that this is a lot of information to take in and a long webinar, so thank you so much. I'm going to close it out with just some quick reminders about RARE across America, because, you know, I have to. But thank you to everyone who registered. We had over 800 advocates register from 49 states and DC and Puerto Rico. So everyone, you guys are superstars. Thank you so much for registering. Next slide, Caitlin. So just a reminder about the schedule. This is up on the website at rareacrossamerica.org. Go ahead and hit next, Caitlin. So first thing to be aware of is the Fast Forward for Rare Practice Your Pitch webinar. If you registered for Rare Across America, you had the opportunity to go ahead and hit yes for that webinar. If you did not already RSVP or register for that webinar, you can do so at rareacrossamerica.org. Caitlin, you want to hit next? And it's going to take place Wednesday, February 24th during our first week of Rare Across America from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Next. And so what is the Fast Forward for Rare Practice Your Pitch webinar? You're going to receive tips and coaching from communications experts. We've partnered with SmithSolve for this webinar, and they are going to help you tell your story so that it has the most impact and inspiration to create action. And then we'll actually have small group breakout sessions with coaches where you can practice your 1-2 minute pitch with other advocates and a coach. And then there will be an opportunity to submit your video after the webinar to receive personalized coaching. Next, Caitlin. And then the next day is the Rare Disease Caucus briefing on February 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Again, you had the opportunity to register for this when you registered for Rare Across America, but if you didn't hit yes on that, you can go ahead and register at rareacrossamerica.org for this as well. Next. And then the next week, there are a couple of other opportunities besides meeting virtually with your members of Congress. The first is Rare Disease Day at NIH, usually happens during Rare Disease Week. And so they are having the event virtually this year on the 1st, and you can register on the NIH website. That link is also on our Rare Across America website. So if you just go there, you can register for everything. And again, FDA held a similar public meeting last year around Rare Disease Day, Rare Disease Week. And so we're excited that they're doing this event again on March 5th. And so you can go ahead and register for that if you're interested, as well, the link there or from our website. And then we want to help prepare you as much as possible for your virtual Hill meetings. So we have a few different opportunities. First is our training webinar on February 4th, where you'll learn how your meetings are being scheduled, what the legislative asks for your meetings are going to be, and more. And then if you're new to all of this, if you haven't done Rare Across America before or met with your congressional lead members before, don't worry, attend that first webinar, and then there's another opportunity on the 9th to get more tips and hear from fellow advocates on their tips, and then to ask all of those questions that I know might be burning in your minds. And we want to be available to all of you for your questions. I know once you dig into all of this, there's going to be more that pops into your head. So we're going to hold some open office hours on Zoom, and we'll share those links with everyone who has registered for meetings ahead of that time. So you can just pop on between 3 to 4 on February 16th or between 4 to 5 on the 18th. And Caitlin and I will be there to take any questions that you have, or if you want to walk through some issue you have, that's a great time to just get Caitlin and I, and we can chat about whatever you're thinking about for Rare Across America. Next slide, Caitlin. And our next monthly webinar will be on February 8th at noon Eastern Standard Time. If you have any issues or a topic that you're interested in learning more about, or something that you have been working on and would like to present on, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we can talk more about it. And thank you to all of you for joining us today and hanging in there, and for registering for Rare Across America. If you have any questions for the speakers, or if you heard something that you'd like to get more involved in, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I can connect you with any of our speakers. And of course, thank you to our sponsors who make our webinars possible. And that's it, I think, right, Caitlin?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon and a good weekend. Thank you to our speakers. Caitlin, there's like a few questions on here that I didn't get to. Maybe I should, let me see if there's anyone I know. Let's see, Bridget Brennan asked about registering.
I'm going to give her my email address. I can answer the Rare Across America ones.
Gosh, there's so many questions. Eric Peterson, I will email him because he was asking about registering, so I'll go ahead and email him. And I'll email Shelley Bowen too.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, cool. I think everything else is good.
Okay, cool. Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it then. Thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, go ahead and end. Sorry about